You're listening to the Platform Launchers podcast. I'm John Stange, and it is great to have you with us this week, as always, because here we talk about building and growing and monetizing your online platform. We talk about taking your passion, turning it into a platform so that you can earn a paycheck, and that's a very relevant reference for tonight. I know that I mentioned that tagline, those taglines each week as we start our podcast, but that's exactly what we do here. And this week, we're going to be talking about personal finances. In fact, I'm going to share with you some very specific things that I pay attention to, that I care about when it comes to my own personal finances and how I'm attempting to steward these things. I was just talking with our Platform Launchers community just moments ago before we started the recording for this podcast that when it comes to personal finances, I have noticed that if I am careful with how I steward my finances, that gives me the opportunity to invest in my online platform. It also gives me the opportunity to be a blessing to my family, gives me the opportunity to be a blessing to my church family as well. And when it comes to personal finances, you're going to notice this in particular, that I take a very spiritual approach to stewarding personal finances. I look at the finances that I am entrusted with, or the finances that you're entrusted with, as a loan or a stewardship on loan to me from God. And likewise, I hope that you look at that at your personal finances from that same perspective. And so I'm going to share what I think is a more spiritual approach to this as we look at these things. Many of you know, I don't know if you listen to my other podcasts, the other podcasts that I create, it's all faith-based content. And so most of the content that I share online is faith-based content. I recognize that here on Platform Launchers, I primarily am sharing business content, but this is definitely one of those weeks where the content is going to bleed over one into the other. And I will say this too, because I know that not everybody that listens to this podcast comes at these things from the same faith perspective that I come from. And whether you do or whether you don't, I hope that you'll at least consider these principles just the same with what you're doing and for the benefit of what you're doing. But I want you to know my heart. I want you to know that when it comes to stewarding personal finances, it certainly has a blessing, a blessed effect on my family, my local church, and also my online platform. But I'm doing this, I'm stewarding what I've been blessed with as something that I look at as just being like faithful with what God has entrusted to me. That's probably the best way that I could phrase that. And there's a variety of scriptures. So in my other life here, I'm a preacher, and so I'm going to do a little preaching for us this week, I guess. But there's a variety of scriptures. There's actually a lot of scriptures in the Bible that speak about finances, personal finances, money, income, things like that, work. Just fruitfulness related to those things. But I want to share just a few here to kind of start us off because they impact how I think about this. So one is from Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10. And that verse says this. It says, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity." Now, I share that scripture because when you look at that portion of scripture, one of the things that it's cautioning us not to do is to love money. You can use money, you can utilize money, but don't love it, meaning don't turn it into something you worship. Don't turn it into something that's like an idol or a false god. That's not the purpose of money. Money is perfectly fine when it's used in a proper way, but the scripture there is encouraging us, don't be someone who loves money, because if you love wealth, you're going to find yourself never satisfied with it because there could always be $1 more and $1 more. And as a result, you never really find contentment. You don't find contentment through wealth. Money is a useful tool, but don't worship it. Romans 13:8 makes this comment. There it says this, "Owe no one anything except to love each other, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law." Now, when you look at the context of that scripture, it talks about all the different ways that at times we as human beings might owe income or owe money to another source. And there the Apostle Paul makes the comment. He says, look, owe no one anything. So he's talking about this idea of not being somebody who is indebted. And you're going to see that very much influences my philosophy. He says, if you're going to owe anyone anything, let it be to love them. Just say in your mind, you know what, I owe this person to love them. I owe that person to love them. But don't be someone who is indebted to other people financially. Hebrews 13:5 says something kind of similar to what we looked at from Ecclesiastes 5. In Hebrews 13:5, there it says this. It says, keep your life free from love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, and that's a reference to God, for God has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I have to tell you, one of the things that I am most content with is my relationship with Jesus Christ. He has promised to never leave. He has promised to never forsake me. And he encourages me all throughout the scriptures to be content with what I have. And one other that I'm going to read, and that's this. It's from 1 Timothy chapter 6. And when you look at verses 9 and 10, it tells us a very cautionary group of words here. It says, but those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. And then it says, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils, and it's through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. So again, here it's encouraging us, look, don't be somebody who just spends your life chasing after money. Don't desire to be rich. You'll end up falling into a snare, senseless, harmful desires, all sorts of things. And again, it says, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. So just be cautious about that. So I'm sharing those things at the outset of the podcast this week because even though I'm about to share some key things related to financial stewardship, I also want to make mention that I don't want to encourage you to love money. Money's a useful tool, but don't love it. Now, that being said, as I share this philosophy, I want you to know that this past year was the healthiest financial year of my entire life. I've never had a year in my life that worked out as well from a financial standpoint as this past year. And I'm going to share with you 6 specific things that are very helpful to me as someone who's building an online platform to focus on when it comes to earning an income from that platform, and then what do I do with the income once it's earned. And I want to share these things because I think they'll be a blessing to you. Again, like I've said already, money is a useful tool, but it's a terrible idol. The stewardship of money is something that has a major impact on our relational health, on our personal health, on the health of our families, the health of our businesses. And ironically, many people, including many online entrepreneurs, will tell you that many have received very little, if any, counsel or instruction on how to steward their finances. So before I go to my list of 6, I want you to join with me in just a quick little exercise. I want you to think back over the course of your life on just think back to the information or instruction that you've received related to personal finances. When you're growing up, were different things told to you, or is that a subject that wasn't really talked about much? Do you have a personal philosophy that you could articulate and outline as far as how you handle your personal finances? And if you do have a philosophy in mind, is that a philosophy that'll be a burden or a blessing to your family? Meaning, is your family going to live in constant fear of running out of money? Is your family going to idolize money? Is the lack of money or the presence of excessive debt something that might actually be hindering you from answering God's calling on your life? I want you to just think about those things with me before I go through these 6 principles that I follow when it comes to stewarding finances, because I think it's useful to just kind of acknowledge we have some influences that influence what we think about personal finance, and there's some of those things in your mind and in your life already. Are they useful to you? Are they helpful to you? I want to challenge you possibly to rethink financial stewardship from a very counter-cultural perspective. And I start financial stewardship from a perspective that, culturally speaking, most people don't seem to embrace. Some people embrace this, but most people don't. So principle number 1 on my list of how to steward personal finances, it actually begins with giving. So principle number 1 is generous giving. I want to practice generosity. I want to be somebody who is a generous giver. Again, you could either worship money or you can use it as a tool to be a blessing to others. You could even use it as a tool in your worship to the Lord. And so a lot of people, when they think about giving, one of the phrases that I frequently hear people talk about is this concept of tithing. If you're not familiar with tithing, tithing is this idea of taking 10% of what you earn right off the top and donating that. Typically, for someone like me, for someone that's a Christian, the way that giving is typically handled is through the local church. So right off the top, I practice tithing. Now, some people say, all right, well, is that a rule? Does the Bible say that that's a rule? Well, I look at tithing this way. I look at it as a floor on my giving, not the max. And I also look at it and I say, all right, well, whether it's a rule or not a rule, I still want to practice it. And the way I kind of phrase this in my mind, when I think back to some of the Old Testament scriptures that speak about people tithing, I think, okay, well, we have people living under the Old Testament that were tithing, and I live under this new covenant or this New Testament that has many additional blessings that the people that lived under the Old Testament didn't have. And so, as someone living under this era where I'm experiencing all sorts of additional blessings, if under the Old Testament people were practicing tithing, I look at that and I say, well, that's the least I can do with somebody who's living with the blessings that I'm living with right now. So I look at that and I say, all right, tithing is going to be a floor on my giving. It's not going to be a max. It's going to be the floor, meaning for starters, I'm at least going to tithe whatever income comes in. And that's the first thing I'm going to do with it. The very first thing, whatever I earn, 10% of it guaranteed is going to be donated as a gift to the Lord, right off the top. I believe, just when we're thinking about generous giving, I believe that generosity has a huge impact on the general culture of your life. I think it'll have a huge impact on the culture of your home. I think it could have a huge impact on the culture of your local church, but I also think it could have a huge impact on the culture of your business, the business culture that you're sowing into what you're building with your online platform. If generosity is one of the key factors that you're starting with, that sows something into the culture of your business that I think is highly valuable, super important. Something that if you're nervous about giving as one of the first things that you do with the income you receive, keep in mind some of the scriptures that I just read. One of the scriptures there, especially what I just read from the book of Hebrews, reminds us that the Lord delights to meet our needs. He delights to meet our needs. He doesn't bail on us. He delights to meet our needs. And so, as we're being generous, don't think that the Lord's eyes aren't on you in the midst of that generosity. Let him show you. He'll meet your needs. But I would encourage us as a starting point when it comes to stewarding our personal finances, begin with generous giving. Don't make that the last thing you do. Don't make that something where you say, all right, I'll give the scraps of whatever's left. Start with giving. And like I said, for me, I look at that and I say, all right, tithing is going to be the floor, not the max. All right, principle number 2 that is really important to me at this season of life. It wasn't important to me at an earlier season of life, but it's definitely important to me now, and that's debt avoiding. So I begin with generous giving, and then I continue with avoiding debt. I want to be debt avoiding. American culture, when you look at our culture, it's practically addicted to debt. Right now as I'm recording this, it's December, and I see people maxing out their credit cards to buy Christmas gifts and all sorts of things. Our culture is practically addicted to debt. And when I think back to an earlier season of my life, I was saddled and burdened with all kinds of debt. I had auto loans, I had student loans, I had credit card debt, I had 2 mortgages at one point, I had a home equity loan, personal loans. I had all kinds of debt at an earlier season of my life. And I remember at one point, my kids were pretty young, getting to a spot where I realized I am one surprise expense away from this whole house of cards just crumbling to the ground. I thought, you know what? I can't afford any surprise expenses. I actually saw a study recently that said that most Americans cannot afford a surprise expense if it exceeds $400. And so I remember at one point deciding I'm going to get rid of my debt as quickly as I can. Now, it took a while to get rid of the debt. I didn't get rid of it immediately. I spent years building it up, and it took me years to get rid of it. But I systematically worked at getting rid of all my consumer debts, every single thing. And then eventually it got to a spot where the only debt I had left was my mortgage. And just about 4 years ago, I finished paying off that mortgage. And so now I can honestly say to you, just like Paul encourages us in Romans chapter 13, I owe no one anything. I don't owe anyone anything. Took a while to get to that spot, but if you're listening to me right now, I would encourage you to get to that spot, because if you owe no one anything, just think about the fun things that you could do with the income that you have if you aren't saddled with debt. I remember when I was starting platform launchers, I had various options for this kind of software that I could use to to build the backbone of this new business. And I looked around at the options and I ended up going with the most expensive one. And I went with the most expensive one, first of all, because I thought for what I needed it to do, it did the things I needed it to do and it did it well. But I also had that margin because I didn't have any debt. I wasn't financially burdened. And so I was able to just pick something that generally speaking, most people would say, oh, that's kind of on the expensive side. But it didn't trouble me and it didn't trouble my wife that I was doing that because we had no debt. So I'd encourage you, get rid of your debt. I'll tell you what, I remember at one point I was driving a brand new car. And when I became convinced that I wanted to be debt free, I traded that car in on an older vehicle. And I remember the car dealer saying to me, aren't you going in the wrong direction? And I said, no, I'm going in the right direction. I traded that car in on something much cheaper and I reduced my debt, and that was a key moment for me that I was serious about it. So generous giving is number one, debt avoiding is number two, but number three on my list is smart earning. And you hear me talk about this from time to time here on the Platform Launchers podcast, and I talk about this in a variety of my books as well. But when it comes to smart earning, that's, we're talking about different sources of income that we would have. And I'll just throw this out to you as a question right now. How many sources of income do you currently have? Many people would tell you they only have one. That's pretty normal. If you only have one, you are very normal. That's what most people have. But I would encourage you to consider the benefit of having more than one source of income. Why do you suppose I think it's wise to have more than one source of income? Well, I saw a study some years ago that analyzed those that are well off financially and how many sources of income they typically had. And I think the study said, this was related to the typical millionaire. So the typical millionaire has more than one source of income. Just for fun, I wonder, just take a guess in your mind. How many sources of income would you suppose the typical millionaire actually happens to have? I'll pause for a moment here, let you guess in your mind. All right, you got a number? The answer is 7. And in many respects, I'm finding that it's 7 or more. 7 sources of income. And it's not 7 things where they're trading hours for dollars. It's sources of income, many of which they don't have to keep working for, things related to investments and other income streams. So smart earning, that's a wise thing to do. And that's something that I try and do in the online space in particular. There are various things that I could point to as regular sources of monthly income. And I put that under the category of smart earning, trying to have more than one source of income and to make sure I've got sources of income that aren't causing me to trade hours for dollars with every one of those sources of income. There are sources of income that do require us to trade hours for dollars, but you want to have more than one kind of income so that's not the only way that you're earning a living. All right, number 4 on my list is this: lean living. Now, this is very countercultural because a lot of people don't think this way, but lean living. So this is what I mean by that. I think it's wise to set up and keep a budget regarding our expenses and your expenses, because there are certain areas in life where we're all tempted to waste money. Now, one of the ways that I am definitely tempted to waste money is by going out to eat. I love going out to eat. So if they're of the areas where I think I waste money, that's probably the worst culprit on my list. That's the biggest area of temptation. But I have noticed that it's very easy to reduce our expenses if we keep a budget and just pay attention to where the money's going. And so we try and keep things lean. There are certain things that we would look at, we'd say, all right, that expense might be a little more extravagant because it's something that we particularly like. But it's nice if you, generally speaking, live lean, you're able to budget for some of the niceties that are the exceptions. So I think it's wise to set up a budget and keep a budget related to your expenses. And generally speaking, keep things lean so that you're not wasting money. Know where your money is going so that it's there to be used for the things that matter most. Number 5 on my list. Now, this is going to make me, number 5 and number 6 are probably going to make me sound less like an online platform coach and more like a dad. But I'm going to say it anyway. Number 5, because both of these factor in to just things that have been a benefit and a blessing to our family related to our personal finances. But number 5 on my list is this, excuse me, and that's equity building. And some people will be like, all right, what's equity? Well, you can have equity in a variety of things, but one of the most common things that most of us have equity in would be real estate, actually buying a home. And I have to tell you, buying a home for most people ends up becoming like a piggy bank in a way. I remember when my kids were little, I said to them at that point, I think I noticed that I had $80,000 in equity in our home at that time. And I remember saying to the kids, I said, guys, just so you know, I hide money in these walls. And they're like, what? I said, yeah, I've got $80,000 and it's hidden in the walls of this house. And my kids were looking around the family room wondering, I wonder if it's in that wall. I wonder if it's in that wall. And I explained to them how equity works. I said, no, as I keep paying off our house, making payments on it, our equity position in the house grows. And right now I've got $80,000 in equity. And I explained to them that that's what I was doing. And the beautiful thing about real estate is it keeps growing in value. So file that away when you're thinking about plans related to your personal finances. Owning some real estate, very good idea because it's like a piggy bank and it could be good stewardship of your finances to own at least some real estate in your overall portfolio. But number 6, this one's huge, and this has been a huge contributor to our income in recent years, but that's wise investing. So when you have, so think about the process that we've been on here, right? We start off by generous giving so that we're not worshiping money. It's like let's give right off the top so that we're not worshiping this, so that we're honoring the Lord as God, not money as God. Starting off with that as our philosophy, and then avoiding debt, and that frees up a lot of capital. And then when you combine avoiding debt with earning from multiple streams of income, and then keeping your expenses low by keeping things lean, and then building your equity, it ends up freeing up finances that you can do creative things with. They often say you either work for money or money works for you. Well, most of us in the early season of life, we're working for money, but when you get to a certain spot in life, money can start doing the work for you. And that's where wise investing, which is number 6 on my list, comes. One of my favorite things to do outside of giving, right? Giving would be the favorite thing to do with personal finances. But if I notice that I have a little bit of extra or even a lot extra, taking it and buying an asset instead of buying a liability. Robert Kiyosaki talks about the differences between buying assets and liabilities. An asset is something that has the potential to grow in value. So like we'll say a stock, for instance. You purchase a stock, and what happens over time, if it's a healthy company, the stock typically, over the long term, grows in value. If you purchase a mutual fund, it tends to grow in value. Right now, cryptocurrency is having a nice boom. So maybe if you purchase crypto at the right time, it's having a nice boom, although that also has a 2-year bust cycle that you have to watch out for if you ever invest in that, kind of a riskier investment. But at the same time, these would be things that would be considered assets. And I look at that and I say, all right, I want to be smart about investing. And so what I've done when I have free capital is I buy assets. I buy stocks. I buy mutual funds. I have an investment in a variety of things. And those things over time have now grown. And I've looked at it. And what ends up happening is if you free up your capital from other sources and you have multiple streams of income, and then you could use those things for wise investing, what ends up happening is instead of you working for money, you hit a tipping point and money starts working for you. And from an online platform standpoint, what happens is you end up freeing up a whole bunch of capital that can then be used to reinvest in your business. You could use it for marketing. You could use it for getting the right software. You could use it to upgrade your computer equipment. You could buy, a new microphone. You could do all sorts of things with the resources that have been entrusted to you. And my encouragement would be to just kind of consider these things as an option when you're thinking about how to steward your own personal finances. I hope, if you're listening right now, that this is something that you will consider, because I think that it has the propensity to really free up a lot of mental space for you. If you can get the financial things squared away, it'll allow you to focus on your business without having to do desperate things for the financial side of what you hope your business is going to bring in. 6 principles: generous giving, debt avoiding, smart earning, lean living, equity building, wise investing. That's the 6. It's been working for our family by God's grace, and we want to honor him and thank him for his blessings. Again, this has been, from a financial standpoint, the healthiest year of our financial lives. And I'm really grateful for that. That's allowed us to be a blessing to people in our lives. It's allowed us to be a blessing to our church. It's allowed us to practice generosity in a variety of areas. But if you're listening to my voice right now, whether you're watching us on YouTube, whether you're listening to the podcast, wherever you may be, I hope you'll take this into consideration because I want it to be a blessing to you, to your family, to your church, and to your business. That's it for us this week. I want to also encourage you to stop over at platformlaunchers.com. You can find a whole bunch of stuff that we have over there that I'm certain will help you build your online platform. And sometimes we just need a word of encouragement, and that's what this week was meant to be, a practical word of encouragement on stewarding our personal finances. But don't hesitate to stop over at platformlaunchers.com. If you're not part of our monthly membership, jump on board. You get to be part of our live calls. You get to be part of our community. Super fun, super helpful, and we'll help you build, grow, and monetize your online platform and really get you set in a good way by God's grace. Thanks again for tuning in this week. It's always a pleasure to be able to spend this time together with you. We look forward to seeing you right here next time. And in the meantime, have an awesome week. Take care, and we will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.